So hopefully you got a good sense, a pretty comprehensive overview of how the Minister sees the green transition here in Denmark, how that fits into the European context and even a little bit into the global context. And we'll get into a little bit more of that during the afternoon. I should say that as I walked out with the Minister after that session, I said to him that I thought it was interesting that he thought being Minister of Implementation was pretty cool. And so I've asked him to come back in 5 years to tell us whether he still thinks that. And we'll see how that goes. We're going to move right into our panel session now. So without further ado, can I invite onto the stage Hannah Sondergaard, Executive Vice President, Chief Agriculture, Sustainability and Communications Officer at Arla Foods, Niels Petter Noring, Climate Director at the Danish Agri-Food Council, Anne-Sophie Gamborg, Danish farmer and member of the European Landowners Organization, and last but by no means least, Oscar Bjørling, the portfolio manager for Syngenta in the Nordics. Come and join us up here, and we'll get into some of the discussion that the Minister has left us with, and no doubt stimulated. Hannah, I think I'm going to start with you and Niels as two folks that have been pretty close, I think, to this green transition and the agreement that was forged last year. Starting with you, Hannah, give us your perspective on where we are, what's going well, what's maybe a little bit more challenging, and where you think it might go next.
Yeah, so I was just sat down thinking before I start, I should ask how many farmers are in this room. Nice. It's always good to know who you're talking to. So, my name is Hannah Sondergaard. I work for Arla, have done so for 30 years. Arla, for those of you that don't know, is a cooperative owned by 7,500 farmers. We are going through an intent to merge with another big German dairy company, at which point we may get to 12,000 farmers, but let's see. It needs to be voted through our board of representatives. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I'm an employee. It's the farmers that own our company. It's the farmers that decide what we do. And I think what has been strong about Denmark, I think, and the process that we've had here is that there's been a recognition that we needed everyone at the table. And I think actually agriculture, you can tell me whether I'm right, Ms. Peter, was one of the first sectors to do what was called a climate partnership, so show the way of what we thought needed to happen as a collective of 30 people or something, 35 people, led by you, I think. And that was a good starting point. I think in business, what also is happening in Denmark is you have a lot of big agri-businesses like our own that also set targets, follow the science-based target framework. And I guess by the time we then got into the tri-party negotiation, we as Arla had already started implementing the way to deliver our targets through the the measurement, the incentives, the way we bring our customers along, and so on, which I think meant that we could provide a lot of input to the practicalities of making things happen and doing reductions, which this is all about. Yeah. I think if I should say where are we now, as was clear also in Jeppes, it's all about implementation. And I think this is all about implementation. Making agreements, setting targets is super easy. Might not feel like that way for those that are sitting in the room, but I think it is the easy part. Implementing it is the super difficult part. And I think we have 7,500 farmers in 7 countries. And I think what we are learning on our journey every day is that those 7 countries are super different. We might also all be in Europe, but the way you farm in northern Sweden in the middle of the forest is super different to the way you farm in Denmark in a very efficient kind of 3,000 cow setup or whatever it might be. And it's those differences that are super important. So I think, it's perhaps if you are looking ahead, it's tempting to think that we can plug and play what we've done in Denmark, but I think, I actually don't think you can plug and play. I think what you can plug and play is that it's really important to have everyone at the table. We would say that farmers are more important than anybody else. But then we would say that. Yeah. But I think the reason why we would say it is that it's on farm where the implementation happens. It's fine for us to sit in offices, but if it doesn't work on farm, it won't happen. Yeah. So I think, what is key as we move ahead in the bigger Europe is that the framework we get to work with is broad enough, is big enough for each and every country to sort of target what needs to happen in that country. Yeah. Great.
I'm going to come back to you as well, Hannah, with this question. Niels Petter, I'd really appreciate your perspective on this, but also to the two of you, as you look ahead to implementation. I mean, I think one thing we can probably be certain about, it's not going to go smoothly. It won't be the same route to the top of the mountain. So how much trust and confidence do you think has been built in the process so far that when things don't go quite as they plan, you kind of fail fast, as they say, and move on and rebuild to do something else? Niels Petter, your perspective on that, and also the broader process you went through.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting today, and I think I'll go a little bit back, because as you mentioned, it's going to be tough to implement it all. But how could Danish Agriculture and Food Council sit at a table and agree on such a thing as we have agreed on? Setting aside 15% of the land and introducing the first tax on emissions from agriculture in the world. Let me begin with that big question. Should this agreement be copy-paste to all other countries in Europe? The answer is not straightforward. It's both yes and no. Yes, as you also mentioned, the process is something that could be copied in all the countries. The agreement itself, there's some elements in the agreement which some of you could be inspired of, but agriculture is so different from one country to another that it's not viable just to take and copy-paste all the agreements into other countries. And then a few words on the process. We were invited, and from the beginning, we were not at all certain if we should enter the room and sit at the table. And we were also not certain that we should sit at a table with so many agendas at the same time. But the alternative to participate would have been no influence at all, stricter regulation, and an even more fragmented debate about our sector. In short, as it has already been said by one I met earlier, it's better to be at the table than being on the menu. And having a process where you one day decide on climate, next day decide on environment, and the third day decide on nature. Individual, it would be optimal, but as a whole, it would not be the optimal solution. So my conclusion was here, we should go into the room, and I think that organizations and governments in the other member states should do the same. And the same goes for EU. We need to gather around the table and make the tough and right solutions. Just a few words about the agreement. Right at the start, the agreement makes it clear that environmental, nature, and climate targets must be fulfilled in a way where agriculture can still develop. It's not a question of stopping producing in Denmark and letting somebody else produce what we're producing today. There are two main pillars, as Jeppe Bruus told. The first one is the land conversion. The second one is the tax, and there's a lot more. But on the land conversion, 15% is going to be converted. If we haven't done it in one with all the different challenges on the table, it wouldn't have been 15%. It would have been 20 or 25%. That's my thinking. We agreed to this because it's going to be 100% compensated. So the farmer, it's voluntary for the farmer to go into the project, and the farmer is going to be compensated. And secondly, it's not going to be decided in Copenhagen from our office. It's locally anchored implementation with the municipalities, with the green NGO, and agriculture out in the countryside. And then some few words on the tax. Between 2030 and 2035, we're going to have a livestock emission tax phased in. And in 2035, it will reach the same level as the tax on CO2 in the industry. 100 euro per ton of CO2 emissions. We have been against this from day one. We still think that it's not the optimal, but it's a compromise. How could we agree on it? And let me give some reasons. First of all, our Parliament, a clear majority said that we're going to have a tax on agricultural emissions. Second, the government had put it into its work program. Third, the tax is only going to be on emissions from the barns and the storage of manure, not on the use of fertilizer in the fields. And as Jeppe Bruus told you, there will be a base deduction, a tax-free allowance. So the most climate efficient farmers, if they invest and do everything, they're not going to pay tax. The revenue will go back to the farmers to invest in green transition. And there will be 5 years to invest before the tax is going to be introduced. And this is, after my opinion, much, much better than having quotas or programs for slaughtering our animals or very strict requirements. So this was very short, the two pillars. There's much, much more in the agreement. And then just one last thing, moving ahead. In the coming years, it is of utmost importance that we will have a strong EU budget with a budget line for agriculture, and we will have a strong common agriculture policy which can support the agriculture sector in its green transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really want to bring Anne-Sophie in because she's been looking at me and smiling all the way through your comments. But just before I do, a question to both you, Niels Peter and Anna. There are some that have argued that you entered this process because you had to, not because you wanted to. And actually, when I listened to what you were saying a little bit there, I thought I might have heard that too. No. Tell me I'm wrong.
It's completely wrong. The government invited us, and they invited the Green NGO. We went to our board and to all companies, had a very good discussion with them, and our board of farmers and our board of the companies, they fully agreed that the best solution for Danish Agriculture and Food Council and for the industry and for the farmers would be if we went into the room and tried to find a good solution. And then our chairman and ourselves, we have been in dialogue with our members every day during half year when we negotiated to hear them, is this okay? Can you agree on it? Or should we leave the room and say we're part of it? So we did it voluntarily. But if we haven't gone into the room, we would have seen the Water Framework Directive being implemented in a way we perhaps couldn't live with, having a tax which would be much worse than the tax we ended up with, etc. And then, one thing, as Jeppe Bruus also mentioned, by sitting together with the Green NGO and the government, we succeeded with coming up with an agreement where the society is also going to finance the most of it. I don't think we would ever have got that much money to support the agriculture in its green transition if we haven't been in the room together with the Green NGO.
Hannah, anything to add to that?
No, I think the last part I 100% agree with. Just a small anecdote. I am a person that's lived outside collectives and industry work most of my career. I've tried to avoid it because it just seemed to be very slow. So when this all happened, I went to my boss, who's CEO of Arla, and said, "What is my brief? Do I try and save us, or do I save everyone?" And he said, "You save everyone." So I think behind one learning, I think also for those of you that are involved in agriculture, is that it's very important to have a cross-sector, strong agriculture organization. I think that when I look across the other European countries that we are in, nowhere is as strong as here. So I think that's a super strong learning, and you're absolutely right that we went into this with our eyes open. The political context in Denmark, I think everyone knows what that is, and I guess we are all in a big experiment. We're in a big experiment in Europe, and we are certainly in a big experiment in Denmark. And I think, personally, I think it's too early to say whether it's a positive learning. And that's because we haven't started implementing. We're only just starting implementing now. The CO2 tax doesn't kick in until 2030. So, it's super early to say that this is a winning formula. I think that's very, very early. I do think that in some ways, you almost need to, and we talked about it before we started, you almost need to, for those that are farmers in the room, we need to avoid this yo-yo, swing from one side to another, because certainly the farmers I work with are saying, please stop that, because we can't make investments for the long term. And I think if there is something that could be dialed up a little bit in the Danish conversation, it is exactly what Jeppe also talked about. And by the way, there is no better minister of implementation than Jeppe Bruus. I know he's not here, but he's best chosen minister for it. So, good. But I think what can be dialed up in Denmark is the conversation around resilience of farmers. If we don't have farmers, we don't have food. I mean, the average age of farmers in Denmark has gone up by 9 years in the last 10. You know, so have we got a resilient farming community for the future? That needs to be higher up, I think, as it is being talked about in Europe. And the whole, security is also security of our food. I think that can come up in Denmark in the conversation. But equally, I think we also need to avoid what there is an indication that could happen in Europe is we swing the other way. Because then what am I supposed to do as a farmer? Okay, is it important? Is it not important? You know, that is also not right. So I think somehow we need to have everything in the conversation. What FAO are saying is this is all about everyone in the world being able to eat a healthy diet by 2050. And then you can talk about how you make it. So I think what we owe farmers is as broad a perspective all the time as possible, and not this tunnel thing. I'm not saying the Danish thing is a tunnel thing, but I think there is a benefit of just making sure that we also talk about why we make food.
I think that point you make about the swinging is as important for farmers, but it's important for businesses like yours and yours, Oscar, Syngenta, and others that are also investing in on the technologies, the tools, the practices that farmers are going to need. And if the agenda is moving around, it's very difficult for you to have that predictability. So it's interesting that you raise that, and also interesting that you feel, as you see, you're hopeful that is going to be addressed here in the Danish context. Before bringing Oscar in on some of the technologies and what farmers are going to need, I'm going to bring Anne-Sophie in because you are a farmer. You own land. You're a farmer of agricultural land, but you also have forestry. I mean, you straddle all elements of this deal. So, are you confident?
First of all, I will say that Niels Peter is working for the Danish Food Council, and Niels Peter knows that I've often addressed that I think that Danish Food Council, as Copa-Cogeca and other, are so much in the defense that we will always be beaten by the offense in the football field. And so seeing Danish Food Council come out of the defense zone and actually walk right out in the offense was quite a thing. Also very uncomfortable, because how would it all come out? As farmers, we are super nervous for these things, because it's the right thing to do. Get everybody around the table. It's seriously the right thing to do, because then now the Greens, we are the Greens, but the ones that call themselves the Greens, they try to say that, we would rather do this, or this is more important, or this is more important. Now it's all been put into a box, and it's like we all agree we will focus on these things. And that's what I think is very important. So what works well is one of the questions. That's voluntary schemes. If a farmer enters a voluntary scheme, they can see themselves in it economic-wise. They can see it because we have to talk about the triple bottom line. They can see the social aspects of it working. They can see the economic side of it working. And they can actually see that they achieve the ecology that we're looking for. Because that's another issue. And I'm really sad to say this, but as farmers, we have seriously come to not trust the universities, the scientific world. That's a serious issue, because I was brought up with trusting what came out of the universities as right and something to be addressed in a proper way. Nowadays, it's a political thing. The universities get all their money if they go into a political agenda, and for some reason, we all know, if we work in the universities, that you come up with a thesis, and for some reason, it comes very close to your thesis, your final paper, because that's actually what you want to achieve. That's becoming a serious issue. If we have worked so hard with the water directives in Denmark. I mean, super hard. Have we achieved anything? Not much. Not much. We certainly haven't achieved what we wanted. When we look at it today, what are the Greens still saying? They're saying, let's do more of the same. And we're like, but listen, guys, it doesn't work. We as farmers, we can see we're doing all the things you want us to do, and it's not working. Let's get back to asking the farmers, what schemes do you think you will achieve these things with? And then you can see that the farmers are actually, oh, okay, I'm entering these schemes myself. I believe in them, and then I will carry through for generations, maybe even, if you really believe in it. So that's very important. What is going to be difficult? Bureaucracy. We simply cannot take anymore. We simply cannot. We end up being either part-time farmers, because you have to have so many consultants helping you out in your everyday work. You have to make that money somewhere else, because the farms can't pay for this all the time. So that's becoming really difficult. Or you need to have like thousands and thousands of hectares to even maintain a proper lifestyle. That's not fair. That's really, really essential that we can live of it. What is different this time? I think it's different that everybody's in the room, that everybody is looking each other in the eye and believing in it. I think of that. I think that there is a big interest in new technologies, and Jeppe Bruus is promising us that there will be enough money for new solutions. That he said about buying land from retired farmers and swapping with some of the land we want to take out. If we don't run out of money for that, because I can see with the forest programs, we have all farmers, all landowners are so interested in making more forest just because they like it or they're very interested. We run out of money in that pond of money every year. So that means the farmers are interested if it's voluntary schemes and they are actually part of it. And there are many landowners are many things. So let's not pressure the people who want to be the super effective farmer into managing ecological areas or making forest. Let's not do that. Make sure that the schemes are so interesting that some people who want to be forest owners start saying, okay, I bought my land to have beautiful land. Oh, that'd be great with some forest. And I'm not doing this for money. But you have a farmer. He's seriously into being the best milk producer in the country, and he knows how to do it and so on. Well, make space for that. And he promises that's going to happen. So I hope that is true. Was that a little bit of everything? Yeah.
You said a little bit of everything, and if we had more time, I would want you to say more about everything. I mean, there's a couple of things that certainly resonate with me there. I'm going to put that question to Brian Vintner a little bit later on from Aarhus University when he joins us. And I think I'm a little bit glib with that. I think there is some truth in that it's often easier to commission studies that tell you a problem rather than one that tells you the solution. I think there's something about what you talked about in terms of the voluntary nature of this. When we see farmers incentivized, when we empower them to manage the land as they know how, they do respond. And a good friend of mine, Hannah from Kerry Foods, told me a story about some of the work that they've been doing in Ireland, and he was saying that when you had Joe down the pub, as we would say in Ireland, talking to his friend Colm about not about the crop or the milk that he produced, but the carbon that they'd saved, you know that you can get a breakthrough. So so there's a lot there. And of course, you talked about new technologies and so forth, which is a good segue into you, Oscar. Tell us a little bit about, from Syngenta's point of view, how confident you are, how enthusiastic you are about what you've heard from the minister, and about how you see that pathway as bringing new tools and technologies and putting it in the hands of people like Anne-Sophie, so that they can produce what we need to, because that's a key part of the agenda as well.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, and good day, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm Oscar Björling. I'm portfolio manager for Syngenta. And I guess some of you know what Syngenta is and some don't, but a very brief introduction would be that we are an upstreams company providing technologies in different categories like seeds and crop protection and biological solutions to farmers to help them become more efficient. And now with all the drivers happening here, more sustainable. And I want to talk a little bit about the role of innovation, and there's been lots of mentionings about innovations, and I think that we have some part to play in it. And I think that about 17 years ago, when I started my studies to become an agronomist, one of the first things I actually learned was that innovation in agriculture can take many forms across multiple domains. So I think that it's easy to think of innovation as the things that we see: mechanization, bigger tractors, digitalization, AI in everything, of course, today. But in agriculture, it's also about biological, genetical, and chemical advances, so understanding the basic science. It's also about business model innovation, which is so important, and system innovation taking place now to transform agriculture. I think that's part of what we discussed today and heard about, which is really interesting for me. But it takes time, but when innovation catches on, it's capable of fundamentally transforming our lives and societies for the better. I think that's an ongoing process for many millennia now, so that's amazing to watch and to study. We talked about, or Jeppe introduced lots of kind of disruptive innovation, new innovations that's really changing. It's not really targeted about enhancing the current modes of production, I would say. It's a lot about bringing new stuff in there, which is fantastic and in a way disruptive, or new innovations. But I will introduce my view on this, and I will do it with a story, if that's okay. And as a farmer's son, I grew up surrounded by agriculture innovation, often taking it for granted, I would say. So one childhood memory that stands out for me, and actually made me discover the more subtle dimensions of innovation in agriculture, is when one year, it's probably 25 years ago now, my father switched from Cossack, which was the predominant variety in Sweden for, I don't know how many years, decades probably at the point, to a variety called Harnesk. And I was so amazed, because then I could shift up to second gear in my combine harvester. And this made it so tangible. I couldn't really see it when I was there, but I could really feel it when I was in my combine harvester. I don't know if it was the amazing speed of 4.2 kilometers that we achieved that made me just cruise through the fields, or if it was the fact that I went back into Cossack and I plugged the combine that made me remember this. But it was anyway my first touch with innovation. And I was hooked. And some 25 years later now, I'm happy that I've been able to develop a career in agriculture and working with agriculture innovation with farmers. I think we, as Syngenta, we work very close to farmers through distribution in Nordics, but we're still focusing on supporting them. And I think it's safe to say that over the millennia, as I alluded to here, and the past centuries, our innovation in agriculture and food value chain has been foundational for civilization as we know it. For all this time, I think we can say that the mission of the farmer has been very simple, not easy, but simple. It's to define at least, and that's to produce enough food for everyone. We really had food shortage, and Hanni, you alluded to this, right? We need to talk about why we actually have a farming sector. Sometimes it feels like it's a problem. But I'm so grateful for the fact that we are food secure in this part of the world. It's a basic human right after all, and still close to 1 billion people starve across the world. But in this part of the world, and at least for now, we can actually say that it's mission complete, and that means that we now transition into other things. And the consequence of this is that the mission of farmers are evolving. So we need to produce food, but we also need to become more sustainable. And I think that as society now expect farmers to make this major contribution to a sustainable future and achieving society's green ambitions, this is an important mission that we really have to embrace. And I think from my perspective, traditionally sustainability initiatives in the agri-food sector have been driven by regulations or limitations of technologies. So it's been a binary. You can do this, you can't do that. Don't do more of that. You can only do this much, and so on. I don't think this type of regulatory frameworks leads. They first of all lead to clear trade-offs between productivity and sustainability. Mm-hmm. So, and I think as a portfolio manager, I'm responsible for both value creation for our customers and also the financial part for Syngenta. And navigating these type of binary frameworks that we have in place very strongly in the Nordics, I would say, is challenging as they inherently slow the pace of product development, product registration struggles, and we really struggle to keep up with rapidly evolving agriculture regulations. And I believe that perhaps even more concerning is that this kind of binary framework actually, these frameworks means that sustainability equals compliance, and I think we need to go way beyond that. I think that's now attempted, and I'm so happy to see that the business model innovations that's happening and emerging in the food value chain, like what you're doing at Arla, to incentivize growth, to adapt more sustainable practices and in an open-minded way. I'm really excited about that and see how our industry can feed into that. And I think that although it's still early stages, I would say that we are now developing new technology, biological technologies, that are now in its early stages but are being commercially adopted by farmers. And the best example of one of these technologies that we're working with is nitrogen-fixing bacteria, where we now have, for example, 18 trials across the Nordics in grassland, where we can clearly see significant yield advances, and we have tried to estimate carbon dioxide footprint. Now this can be done in many ways, but we've been using our methods, we've seen clear reduction on carbon dioxide footprints in relationship to what's being produced. And I think it will take time, but history shows that innovation has the potential to surpass all current expectations. Going back 100 years, it was impossible to imagine the kind of agricultural systems we have today. And I think it's very important that we together, I mean, you're doing it together now with many people in this tripartite agreement and things like that. But I think that we really together, I believe that we can innovate, inspire, enable our farmers to once again transform the agri-food system to achieve a more sustainable food supply and more prosperous society. And I think that's very important. I hope that politicians will enable us to bring innovation to market faster. And I'm really looking forward to continue to discuss this with all of you.
Thank you.
Oscar, thank you very much indeed for that. It touched on something that Hannah and I were talking about before we came on here, and it's such an important part of it because this is systemic, right? If we're going to do this, it's not about whether you have just a tax or a regulation here. You've got to have a regulatory system that enables the new innovation and technology to come in. Again, a question perhaps back to the two of you at that end of the panel. Are you confident that they're thinking systemically about how to do this here in Denmark, but perhaps more importantly, at the European level, because we live in a single market?
I could start. I think that there's a lot of new technologies, especially biosolutions, a lot of them in United States. It would take 2, perhaps 3 years to get them approved, get them on the market and used on the farms. In Europe, I think we would multiply it by 3 or 4. So it will be 8 years, 9 years. And that's not a good way of thinking because we have to be open to new technologies. Then there's also new technologies in the stables and concerning manure. Today, we won't get any benefit of using new technology if the technology is not approved and they say, okay, this new technology has a lower emission than the traditional one. And again here it takes several years from having the new technology to getting the technology approved in Denmark and afterwards approved in the UN. So that's what we decided also in the big package, in the big agreement, that there should be a fast track on new technologies which can be used in the stables and in the storage of manure, so we can get new technologies which can reduce the emissions. But if we're just thinking of doing everything like we've been doing always, then there's perhaps only one way ahead, and that we will lower the emissions in Denmark, but then we will also lower the production, and that's not what we want. We want to set aside 15-16% of the land, and I would hope that we will have the same or even a higher production on the rest of the land we will continue to use as agricultural land.
I want to bring in a couple of voices from the audience, or at least give them that opportunity before we break for coffee. Anna, just one last opportunity. Anything to build on what Niels Petter just said?
I think as people, we like to simplify things. And that often means that we try and focus on one thing, right? But this isn't like that. So this is super complicated.
Yeah.
And I think we need to recognize how super complicated it is and what tensions are in here. When it comes to, so we have the tension between we need space for nature, but we also need food production. So how do we multi-purpose everything? So use the land. This will all be, in my opinion, about how do we maximize the energy per hectare and the nature value per hectare, right? And how do we get all of that right? And that's not easy.
Yeah.
Nobody has a model for it, and we pretend that there is some answer to it, and there isn't.
Yeah.
So I think there is something about how do we allow that complexity to sit with us until we work out what the right solutions are. I think for innovation, I actually think it's about thinking systemically about how do we create the demand for the innovation so that it can come.
Yeah.
How do we have the right incentives for farmers that doesn't say do this or do that, but where they have the incentive to do the things that the outcomes that we want them to achieve, and then the technologies will be pulled through. And those incentives can be created by businesses like ours with our incentive model, or by regulation or whatever it might be. And I also think there is what are really the barriers, and let's remove them really quickly. So a lot of these things that we need to get onto the field, are they safe enough? And whatever it takes to understand that quickly, let's just do it quickly. We had a COVID vaccine within a year. We must be able to do this fast.
Yeah. Quite
also in Europe.
Yeah, quite right. I love I mean, when we want to act, we can act very fast.
100%.
We've clearly demonstrated that. I was about to be somewhat glib in saying that our chairman, and he wasn't talking about CAP simplification, says that simplification is simply fiction. And I think there is some truth in that. This is complex, and we need to think systemically, and we can't just intervene in one area and expect everything else to fall into line. I do just want to give the audience, a couple of you have sat through the minister's presentation now twice. Are there any burning questions, any burning comments, reflections on what you've heard? Yes, sir. Please do introduce yourself with a microphone so we know who you are and anything you say.
Yeah, I'm Tom Axelgaard, and I'm the head of Danish Farmers Abroad. So, of course, we are very interested in our organization about what's going on in the whole of Europe, not only in Denmark. But I still want to focus a little bit on Denmark, because congratulations with your way of doing it, with the sort of making the framework. But I can fully agree with you also on what you said about the implementation, that it will be difficult. And we know, more or less, that time frame that has been put now will probably not be met. We are talking about 250,000 hectares of forest. We're talking about 140,000 hectares of wetlands. And I've been in a couple of projects, and 5-6 years ago, and we're still not in target, and that was 200 hectares. So I mean, with the bureaucracy, and you mentioned it yourself, in US it would be 2 or 3 years. In Europe it would probably be 10 years. In China it would be 1 month. But what happens when we do not reach the target? Because that is really important. We have done it with the nitrogen for many years. We have still not reached the target, and the impatience grows in the population, the politicians, and and with us also as farmers. Yeah, you're right.
We're doing it.
Yeah. So the problem is that we can risk still, as you said, Niels, that it will be there will be. We managed to. Jeppe said we made it. We made it 2000 the target. But that was again the universities and the calculation methods, because there was 1.5 million ton that was suddenly coming out of the blue, and that helped us a lot. So my question is, do you really believe in that the patients will last, so that we can implement all these new technologies? Pyrolysis, as you mentioned, just stopped right now because they are waiting for. I'm in a lot of biogas contexts also. We have stopped our expansions now because we can simply not make it economically. So all these good things that are happening, they are also crossed by lack of economy in it. So I'm afraid.
So
it's a very big question, but I'll try to be brief and take it in steps. The first step is on the transition of land. Will we make it? 15% of the land should be transformed. On the peatlands, 140,000 hectares of land, around 5, 6, 7%. I think the farmers will have made a contract with the municipalities already in 2028. If the farmer doesn't accept an agreement with the municipality, then the farmer is going to pay a tax on the peatland. And I think a lot of the farmers, they won't be able to have a business continuing farming on these lands with a tax. So a lot of the land will already be taken out in 28. The forest, that's another question, because we are talking about forest which will be planted from now on and until 2045. And the pressure, 45, and the pressure in that area, that's in fact the Water Framework Directive. Because if we continue with having problems with the Water Framework Directive, and we don't set aside, transform the land, then the government would be allowed to stricten the application conditions on the farm. So we will go below optimal when you're using the fertilizer, 5%, 10%, etc. So that's also a pressure in that way. And then the big question on the tax. I don't think it's a problem for the agriculture. It's a problem if we don't have all the technologies. I think the big problem is that we have perhaps some people working with tax in Denmark, but they have also shown that it's difficult to build up a new tax system. And this is not a very simple tax system. It could be a very simple tax system with just counting the cows and counting the pigs and then calculating what should the tax be. But then you're not able to use this base deduction.
Yeah.
So you have to have a very complicated tax system with all the different kind of animals, all the different kind of staples, all the different kinds of technology, all the different kinds of technologies out in storing. All this you have to put into one accounting system. And they only have 4.5 years, and then they have to be into force. Our focus is pressure, pressure, pressure on the government to get all the technologies ready for the farmers so they can invest. Because I think in 2030, we will still have a society with a very big pressure in the climate area. So we will have a CO2 tax. And if we don't have the possibility to take into account all the new technologies, then we're going to pay such a big tax that we will really see the agricultural production going in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to do one more question. Sir, second row at the end here. Just introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you very much for what you presented. Coming back to the Green Agreement, the Minister said the goals will be okay. You're not quite sure, but at least let us take the bet. When you discussed this agreement all together, did you get information, real information, on the real impact of the whole scheme? Because Denmark has been and is still a very efficient agricultural productive country in the dairy sector, in the pig meat, in arable crops, and so on. What will be the consequences for that on the production? -5, -10, -30% production in the pig meat sector, in the dairy sector, or level or even more, because Syngenta will be there with innovation. What information did you get on that? What is your feeling if you don't have information, and what will be the next step?
So did you get an impact assessment? And if you didn't, why not? And if you did, what did it say?
It's very easy to answer. There's no impact assessment. But I think that everybody in the room think a lot about what would be the impact in the long run for the agriculture. And Hanne could answer. I could also say some few words. I think that we know that there's coming a tax. We know that tax will influence. But we have the time. We know that land will go out, but we will still be able to produce the same amount on less land. I think there's other questions which are much more important. It's the prices on the products. It's other things coming in. And then one very important thing. If we hadn't gone into the room and agreed on this agreement, there will still have been all the European legislation we had to fulfill. It had been with other agreements or just legislation from the government. So I think that the agreement is in fact helping the agriculture more than handicapping the agriculture.
Hannah,
So
final word.
I can go. Some people say if you want to go big, go deep. So I can go deep in dairy to try and. If I take an underground perspective, I would say the impact is all about implementation, or the impact on food production and efficiency is all about implementation. Because if you implement it well, our view would be it's okay. But if you don't implement it well, our view would be it's really bad. So if you implement it well, if you use every hectare for several purposes and get all of that needs placed in the right places, it's okay. If the farmers, our farmers need biogas capacity, so hopefully the economics of that will pick up before 2030, and the feed additive that was talked about before, and if, generally speaking, if farmers implement that, they're going to be okay. We have some issues with organic farmers that need other levers and so on, but they're going to be okay. But it's all in the implementation. That's where the thing can go very right or very wrong. My perspective on your question would be, we have a choice now. I'm not a farmer. I'm paid by farmers, and I guess I have a voice with our farmers. I can choose to say to them, forget it, just ignore it, look the other way, don't do it, it's bad. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but I can also say, listen, you know, if we lean into this, we have an opportunity to influence it in all the 23 local areas. If we go with Niels Peter to the meetings and say, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, we have an opportunity to influence how well it's implemented. But I think we need to do that, because it doesn't come on its own, as you say.
Anne-Sophie and then Oscar, just to finish. Final reflections on the panel. 2 words.
Well,
or more.
I hope for the best. I hope we don't run out of money. I hope we don't change the agenda on a political scale midways, because it's a lot of change. So and I hope that that the farmers will be respected for their ability to understand the soil and understand the solutions, because we are the solution. We can do all these things.
100%.
We have to be able to do it with the right technologies, the right framework around us, and we are willing and ready to do it, but we need to make sure that it will happen.
Oscar, final word.
Yeah, I think the most interesting takeaway from me was the words that was said on the viability of the farmer themselves, that we need to ensure that farmers come out in a good position after all of this. I think that requires some stability. That's also very much required for us to be able to contribute in a good way to this change and this transition. And if those 2 things are secured, then I think Denmark will be good. I hope.
Very good indeed. This has been a fascinating panel session. I really enjoyed it. If I was to sum it up in 4 words as to what you've done, why you did it, whether it will succeed, I might walk away with the words yes, maybe, hopefully, and absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, give them a round of applause. Thank you.